Established in 1926, the GAO School is the first school in the nation created for students with dyslexia and other language-based learning differences.
Today, GAO is a premier boarding and day school for students in grades 5 through postgraduate.
Located 30 minutes from Buffalo, New York, GAO's campus features 7 dormitories, classrooms, an indoor athletic center, sports fields, theater and art studios, a robotics lab, and more.
To find out more about this nurturing and supportive academic environment, please visit www.gao.org or call 716-652-3450. Hey, Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So today's pod, we talked to Dr. Jan, and I'm so sorry, Dr. Jan, if I say your name wrong, Wasowicz. And she was just, oh my gosh, we had so much fun. We had so much fun going, not necessarily going into this, but in the actual interview itself, because she's just so personable and likable.
Oh, yeah. And she's got so much knowledge that she brought to us. I learned something new. I always learn something new from all of these experts. But she actually was talking about how she's a speech language pathologist, and she was talking about all the ways that the dyslexic person or just a language learner needs to go through the process to be able to read.
Absolutely.
And I was impressed to hear about how half of people identified with dyslexia have a developmental language disorder.
It makes sense. And I think about, because we know that dyslexia exists on a spectrum. And I think about all my kids that some of them come in with good language background, good language processing, and then some of them don't. But they're actually a little better at maybe some of the things like decoding and encoding. And then you have that bottom quadrant where they have both, difficulty with language processing and poor decoding and encoding. So I thought it was really a very, very informational podcast that we just did.
Yeah, she has charts. She referenced charts and all kinds of articles. She just was fascinating.
So the hope is that we can get our webmaster to put up some of those charts so that you can see this.
Yes.
But let's talk a little bit about Dr. Jan. So she has, with PhD, CCC, SLP, BCS, CL. I only know SLP and PhD. Those are the only ones I know. But she has more than 40 years experience as a language literacy and learning specialist, and she's worked with students who have language-based reading, writing, and spelling problems in a variety of educational settings, including public schools and private practice.
She's authored articles appearing in scholarly journals, is the inventor of the original ear aerobic software, and is an author of the Spell Links products, all of them, and is the lead moderator of the esteemed Spell Talk multidisciplinary professional listserv.
If y'all haven't been on Spell Talk before, you should, because it's great to wake up in the morning and have that in your email and read over it. And it's got some huge names that are responding, and you feel like you have a front row seat with some of these huge names.
Yes.
So Dr. Jan is an ASHA certified Illinois licensed and Florida licensed speech language pathologist and an ASHA board certified specialist in child language. And she holds a professional educator's license with multiple endorsements from the State Teacher Certification Board of Illinois. She maintains a private practice in Illinois via telepractice and in Florida serving students with oral and written language disorders.
So she got to move from Illinois to Florida is what I learned.
Yeah, I think we need to go to Florida.
Yeah. We could take the show on the road.
We would love that. I would love that.
Let's go, Amy.
Let's do it. Okay. So coming up is the podcast with Dr. Jan Wasowicz. And I'm sorry, Dr. Jan, I'm mutilating your name, but we're so excited to present this.
Yes,
so
enjoy
it. Hi, this is Amy.
And Melissa. We are a couple of retired Texas teachers who are CALTs, certified academic language therapists. We started our own businesses, and now we have a podcast called
The Dyslexia Duo. So join us for our informative podcast, where we'll delve into dyslexia, covering the topics that affect parents, therapists, teachers, practitioners, and anyone who wants to learn more. We'll guide you through everything you need to know, from the first signs to the intricacies of dyslexia curriculum placement and beyond.
This season, we will cover the referral process, what to expect when your child or student is dyslexic, the generational impacts of dyslexia, and how to support those affected.
Come join us. Melissa.
Hey, Amy.
So today we have a very exciting guest. I've followed her for a few years when I was still working in public education. We have Dr. Jan, and I put a pronunciation guide next to your name, Wasowicz, with us today. And if I said it wrong, you feel free to correct me. And just for our audience, we have a very diverse audience. We have parents, we have teachers, we have other educators, we have practitioners, we have therapists, we have QIs, we have admin, we have policymakers, decision makers, and we're global. So in a very short time, because we've only been doing this since June, and it's kind of taken off a lot. Yeah. So we're very excited that you're here with us. Could you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. And I pronounce my name Wasowicz, but please call me Jan. And I'm really impressed by what you've accomplished so far and the diversity of your audience, which I think is huge. I'm a big fan, as you know, Amy, if you've been on Spell Talk, I'm a huge fan of multidisciplinary discussions and collaborations. So I'm just thrilled to hear about your diverse audience. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. So if people, before we start, what is the name of your website? And then, of course, your Spell Talk, if people want to kind of look it up and listen and cruise the internet while they're listening to the pod.
Yeah, so Spell Talk is the listserv. It's free. I think we're in our 18th year. We're getting close to 20 years. It's again, multidisciplinary discussion group, professional discussion group. We have parents who lurk, and we're happy having parents who lurk, but only professionals can post. And we've been blessed by having some of the biggest names in the field be on there and contribute. So we've got some pretty major researchers on there. And you can just search for Spell Talk, all one word, and get yourself signed up. Again, it's all free, always has been. And Spell Talk is the listserv I moderate. The company that I'm the founder of, and we have a suite of products, that's Spell Links. So it's spell-links. And you could go either to spell-links.com, or Learning by Design is also the name of our company. We're actually registered in 2 different states, and so we go by both Spell Links, which is where we're registered, how we're registered in Florida, and Learning by Design is how we're registered and incorporated in the state of Delaware. So either one, spelllinks.com or learningbydesign.com.
Awesome.
You sound like a busy lady.
Yes. Wearing a lot of different hats, staying busy. Yeah,
Awesome.
Love it.
Very good.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what led you to the career you're in today?
Yeah, so I'd like to say that I came into literacy, which really is what I do right now, is about reading, writing, and spelling, everything I'm doing, and I can talk more about that. But I came into literacy the way all of us do, the way our students do, and that's through oral language or spoken language. So I am a speech language pathologist, and in my very, very early part of my career, I worked exclusively with children who had speech language disorder, which is now called developmental language disorder. It's been called specific language impairment. It's different names, but basically a disorder in their spoken language. And so that was the beginning part of my career. And I'll tell a story a bit later, because I know we have a talking point on something, but I eventually moved into literacy and then took all of my clinical training to develop products. My first company was aerobics, for those who have been around a while. And that was to take all of my clinical training, put that into software programs to teach phonological awareness skills at the time. And that was in the 90s. That company was acquired by Houghton Mifflin, and I started my current company, which is Learning by Design Spell Links. And now the focus is on reading, writing, and spelling. So we've gone beyond phonological awareness, which we'll talk about. We need to move beyond phonological awareness. And so that's kind of what I've done. But we know that spoken language, I know you know that, and I know many of your audience members know, spoken language is the kind of the anchor for literacy, for reading, writing, and spelling. So I really came in with that anchor. That's my original training and expertise. And then throughout my career, I have shifted over to the focus on literacy and never gone back because I just love it so much.
So how would then, thinking about you going into this mode where you loved literacy and that's your driver right now. I know you're familiar with dyslexia as well. So how would you describe dyslexia for our listening audience?
I follow what's called the quadrant model, and people can search for the quadrant model. I can hold up the picture, but I know we're not doing video. But the quadrant model, which was developed by several researchers, Tiffany Hogan, there's so many names here, Bishop, Snowling, Hugh Katz, Weismer. There are a lot of names that are attributed to the quadrant model. And basically the quadrant model looks at literacy and looks at language and puts individuals into 4 squares, right? Quadrant. And there's the typically developing spoken language, typically developing written language. Those are our typically developing students, right? Then we have a group of students who have typically developing spoken language, but struggle with that decoding and encoding of the word, right? The spelling and the reading at a word level, really. Mm-hmm. It's the encoding, decoding automaticity with that. And so that group is defined as the dyslexic group. Okay? Then we have another group of individuals who they're fine with their encoding and decoding of words, kind of their foundational reading, spelling skills, but they have a deficit or struggle in their spoken language skills. So they have what is called developmental language disorder. Mm-hmm. And just like any other skill or area, everything's kind of on the spectrum. Those who are the most severe will be identified as developmental language disorder, but certainly there are students who have weak oral language, spoken language skills. And these skills interfere not only with the comprehension of spoken language and the expression of your ideas in spoken language, but they also greatly impact and interfere with your comprehension of reading comprehension, and your ability to write. So that's the mixed group. That's the DLD group. And then we have a 4th quadrant, which is they have both. They have dyslexia and they have developmental language disorder. So again, 4 quadrants: typical, developmental language disorder, dyslexia, and mixed dyslexia, developmental language disorder. Now, in terms of how many students have developmental language disorder, we don't have concrete numbers. It's called the hidden disorder because it goes undiagnosed. Sometimes for your entire lifetime, you may never be diagnosed. But it's believed that 2 children in every classroom, 7 to 10% of children have developmental language disorder. So that's about 2 children in every classroom. But now, if we just look at the dyslexic population, half of the individuals with dyslexia also have developmental language disorder.
Wow.
And that used to be part of our state we've changed the definition for the state of Texas a while back, but I remember seeing that developmental language disorder being part of the definition and not quite understanding what that was, but I'm glad to hear now what that is. That makes so much more sense because as you're saying it, I'm trying to form these connections and I'm like, oh, that's what that is. Okay. That's good.
Yeah.
So what comes first, the DLD diagnosis or the dyslexia diagnosis?
Well, fortunately, dyslexia diagnosis is people are getting identified, right? And that's a great thing. But we don't have enough awareness, first of all, of DLD, nor do we have enough tools in the hands of educators to identify. There is no DLD screener mandated, no universal screener. There are people working on that. There are groups working on that. There are screeners available. The TILS, which is the Test of Integrative Language and Literacy Skills, that's an assessment that is used to identify and tease out. In fact, one of the authors on the TILS, Nicola Nelson out of Western Michigan University, she's part of the quadrant model too. She's been a contributing author on the quadrant model. So the TILS will help identify and tease out who has developmental language disorder, who has dyslexia, and who has the combination of
Wow.
both. So that's an assessment tool that speech language pathologists use. Now, that same author has a TILS screener. I don't know if it's called the TILS screener. It might be, but it's a screening tool. And it is a questionnaire screener, so it can be easily administered, takes just a few minutes, high specificity and sensitivity, which is what you want in a screener, to identify children, individuals, but children who have developmental language disorder. So we, SLPs in general, different groups are working very hard to help teachers become aware of DLD and the tools that they can use. And I think it's especially critical for those who work with students who have dyslexia, because half of your students with dyslexia have DLD.
Yeah.
So they need, different types of interventions. So you're going to only be able to take them so far until that DLD is identified and specifically teased out and remediated.
So the screener, just because screener means all, so that would be anybody could administer that screener, but would it, or just the SLP administers the screener and then maybe the evaluation?
No, I think I'd have to look. I believe classroom teachers can administer that screener.
Okay.
I will share with you afterward, and you could put it in your show notes.
Yes.
An article that did a meta-analysis review of different screeners for DLD, and 3 of them rose to the top in terms of high specificity and high sensitivity, which is, again, what you need to have in a screening tool. Out of those 3, only one of them can be administered by classroom teachers, and that's the TILS screener. The other 2 require extra qualifications, either being a psychologist or a speech language pathologist.
This is great information, because if you have a student, and you refer them out to the SLP, and then you're also doing the dyslexia assessment and they qualify for everything, you get a complete profile of how that student learns, and I know that we're therapists. We don't always just teach to a curriculum. We individualize it as much as possible. And I think that would be a huge help in understanding some of those other pieces besides the low-hanging fruit, like phonology, decoding, fluency. Those are all easy, right, to instruct in. At least for our population, it's easy to instruct in. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, the foundational skills, right, the decoding and the encoding. So if it's DLD is going to impact, beyond the word level. So syntax,
semantics,
reasoning, semantics, reasoning, pragmatics. So there's a lot of higher order skills that, again, they interfere with the ability of that individual even to listen in a classroom and understand what is being spoke. So there's a real need, and there's a real push for it right now. DLD and Me, that's all one thing. DLDandme.org is a website. That one is run by Tiffany Hogan, who's a leader. She's a speech language pathologist, and she is really leading the cause on helping develop awareness. So DLDandme.org. The other one, I always forget the name of it, but there's one other one that, again, I can get to you for the show notes. There's another one for DLD awareness as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
And I will say, just as a side, so I am in private practice, and I didn't, in my introduction, I probably should have worked that in. So I've been in private practice my entire career. My very, very early part of my career, I was a full-time professor at university in the Chicagoland area. And then I was an adjunct professor at several universities, really for like 20 years or so. But during that time when I was adjunct, I then developed my private practice. And I was working initially with students who had just DLD, but now I work with students who have either just DLD, just dyslexia, or a combo. And because I'm in private practice, of course, I get a lot of parents calling referrals. And invariably, a lot of the students I pick up on my caseload have been receiving some type of dyslexia intervention at their school. And the parents will usually say something like, well, they made progress, but now they've plateaued. Yeah. Or they've improved in their reading, but not their spelling, or something, but basically there's still a problem. And invariably they get on my caseload, and almost all of them have developmental language disorder. And that is what's, kind of having them hit that wall. Some of them are not getting good speech to print instruction, and that's another reason why they're hitting the wall. We could talk more about that too.
Yeah.
It's really kind of fascinating, because you think about how it could open up our practices.
That's what I was just
ourselves,
thinking too. It could totally change, not just Melissa and I, but all the other dyslexia instructors, therapists, practitioners that are out there. It could really change how they instruct their students.
Yeah, having that information will help. So first of all, only SLPs can diagnose developmental language disorder, and state laws really restrict that SLPs are only qualified to treat DLD. But that doesn't mean there can't be things that you collaborate on. And now that you have your awareness of like developmental language disorder, you have a better understanding of where to focus instruction. Or, if you're working hand in hand with an SLP, which I'm a huge, a proponent of, then she or he may be able to share some specific methods to help support what you're doing. But yeah, state licensing laws and even insurance companies only recognize SLPs for providing DLD services, and state licensing boards only recognize SLPs for DLD services. And
yeah, no, that makes sense. And I remember when I was still working in public ed, I always looked to my SLPs when I get a new referral, because if I had a child that was attending with them, that was always a big red flag, okay, it could be dyslexia. And I can remember back in my early days when I first, I've been doing this since 92, I can remember going to my SLP because she was teaching phonological awareness, and that wasn't something that was embedded in our curricula yet. And not yet. I mean, it was there. There's always been, not always, but I know of, you probably know better research than me, but I know of research for phonological awareness support back in the 70s, but and I didn't have it in my curricula. It wasn't embedded yet, so I wasn't aware of it because, again, 92, we didn't have the computers in our classrooms so that we could look things up, and get that support.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, I'm always going to celebrate anyone who's collaborating across disciplines. So I'm glad, you guys are doing that. But you reminded me about this story. I want to sneak in here. So in the 90s, you mentioned the 90s, I had a thriving private practice, but I was still only doing oral language, developmental language disorder, and working on speech production, right? And language as well, but the actual production of sounds with children who were mispronouncing sounds. And parents of my caseload, they were coming to me and saying, what are you doing with my child? Because all of a sudden, since they started services with you, their reading and spelling at school has improved dramatically. And I wasn't working on reading and spelling, but I knew the research just like you did, Amy. It's been around, and I'm sure Melissa too. We've had research out there for decades and decades. So, and I knew of it because I'm tied into academia, and I was a professor for 20 years. And right around that time, so this is in the mid 90s now when this is happening for me, then the parents said, well, is there any software program that does what you do? Because we'll bring them here once a week and they're making fabulous progress, but wouldn't it be great if they could also be on a software program as well? Then they'll be going off to Harvard in no time. So I didn't have children. I went down to the local store where they sold, at that time, it was CD-ROMs.
Yeah.
And this is the 90s, and CD-ROMs, we now call it edutainment because it wasn't really educational software, but the edutainment CDs fit in, all the CDs would fit in my office, your office. It wasn't that much, right?
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, first of all, this is fluff, this is edutainment. I have the expertise in a lot of different areas. I'm just going to do this as a summer project. I'm going to put together a little software program. I had background in working with software and coding and everything. And long story short, that was in 1994, I believe, or 95. In 1996, I incorporated aerobics, cognitive concepts. And in 1997, we released Aerobics Step 1. That was my first software program. Nobody, as you said, Amy, no one in the schools was doing it. No one really, unless you were tuned into the research as you were, no one really knew about phonological awareness. In fact, when I was trying to raise funds from investors for my venture, they all said, well, no, there's phonological awareness, because they would go and talk to the schools and the principals. And either the principals or the administrators or the teachers would say, well, oh, we already do that, meaning phonics. They didn't even understand
Yeah,
the
they didn't
difference.
understand the difference, right?
Yeah. Or they would say, well, phonological awareness, we don't, what's that for? So we couldn't even raise money from investors, because the investors wouldn't look at the research. They would only look at what the schools were telling them. Anyhow, so raised money from friends and family, got aerobics out there. And that was in 1997 when we released Aerobics Step 1 in June. It was in 1998 when NIH completed their 30 decades of research and released their report to Congress. And the National Reading Panel convened and put out the paper. And basically, Congress mandated that every child in every school must have phonological awareness instruction. Aerobics was the only product on the market.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Anyhow, and so that was really how I got into creating educational products, because of that experience. But it speaks to, the power of phonological awareness at that time, and just following the research, right?
Right. No, I can remember the first time I saw phonological awareness in action. I was like, I probably was doubting a little bit, because I was like, and the more I did it with students, the more it made me a believer. Now, interesting story. Okay, so this is a total aside. I remember aerobics. One of the campuses I worked at, I brought my son, who at the time was 5. So my son's on the autism spectrum. And it was mandated that all kindergartners and first graders go to the aerobics lab. So this is in 2004, 2005, something like that, right? And so he was hyperlexic, right? He saw the word a few times. Somebody had to say it out loud. He saw the word, heard it, he had it. He had like 1, 2 repetitions, maybe 3 repetitions, and he had it. But he had to go to the aerobics lab. Nonetheless, he had good decoding, good encoding, all of it. And he would get bent out of shape when it came to the screen with the clown with the balloon, that if he didn't do it in time, it would pop, because he hated, that was one of his things that would set him off, were popping balloons. And he's like, I hate it, well, the balloon pops and I just don't know what sound they're trying to, because that's not how he learned. That's not how he learned that, because he was very good at just right away understanding the whole word. It's a fascinating thing, the brain.
It is. And I'm sorry about cartoons balloons. We did hear from parents of children on the spectrum that balloons popping.
Oh God, he wasn't the only one. I just remember he'd be sitting out in the hallway outside a computer lab. I'm like, what did you do now?
Yeah, no. So first of all, you all, I can't believe you all go back that far. None of y'all look like that.
I have filters on. Filters.
Filters are good. We like filters. Anyhow, no, that's awesome. And hyperlexia. So when I was talking about the quadrant model, in some quadrant models, you're going to see the term hyperlexia in that square for the students who have very good decoding skills, encoding, right? Recognize the word. They only need a few exposures, but they don't have those higher order language skills. And very much individuals on the spectrum fall into that quadrant. Now, I have an argument with a colleague of mine in SLP. She wants to bring back the term hyperlexia to that square in the quadrant model. I personally like that they're calling it developmental language disorder, because I think many people associate the hyperlexia with individuals, for example, on the spectrum. And they forget that it could be other reasons why they're in that.
I was going to say, I feel like that would just pigeonhole a little bit more, whereas the other one is more of a broad definition.
Right. Yeah, it covers so many different areas.
So does a hyperlexic have developmental language disorder, or can they, or how does that work?
Yeah, typically, and we'll just take an example of typically on the autism spectrum, and I'm just going to talk in general because, of course, there are so many exceptions, but typically they are very good with the encoding, the decoding of words, but they have a deficit in the pragmatics. So pragmatics is an area of language. And if we have time, I hope we talk about the reading rope versus the language literacy network. One piece, when I created the language literacy network, one piece that was missing from the reading rope and is on the language literacy network is pragmatics. because pragmatics is one of many areas of language that feed into not just understanding and expressing spoken language, but understanding and expressing in written language. And that pragmatic piece is one area that is typically weak and needs specific attention in someone on a spectrum. Again, I'm brushing some broad strokes here, and they could have other higher order language deficits as well.
Interesting. Now a word from our newest sponsor.
Is your child struggling with reading, writing, or spelling?
Do you suspect they might have dyslexia?
At Hill Country Dyslexia Services, our team of experienced educational diagnosticians are here to help.
We offer a thorough evaluation process at HCDS to help you identify your child's needs.
Call us today at 512-648-2291 to schedule an appointment and take the first step towards supporting your child's learning journey. Let's return to the show. We could talk about the language literacy. I was actually looking at that graphic the other day. So in Texas, I know, I love it. I think it's very comprehensive. I was looking at it, I was like, oh, that's so much more involved and detailed. So I have, in Texas, all of our teachers in grades K through 3 have to do something called Reading Academy. And the Reading Rope was a major player in the Reading Academy. And for the gen ed teachers, that's good. They needed to have that exposure. They may have had it in college, but I doubt it. So they probably didn't have that exposure. But I remember went to an ALTA conference last year, and we're getting ready to have another one coming up here soon. And Dr. Hasbrook was talking at the ALTA conference, and she was actually talking about the Reading Rope. The Hollis Scarborough Reading Rope was like 2000, 2001 or something. And she goes, actually, the simple view of reading was around before the Reading Rope, but the two, I'm blanking on Turner and Tunmer and Gow. Yeah, it was based off of the Reading Rope was actually kind of based off that, and they talked to each other about it and kind of made it a little bit more elaborate. But I almost feel like your phase 3 of the language literacy network, I feel like your graphic is like the third step of understanding everything that is involved with decoding and coding fluency, everything like that. So can you talk to us about, I kind of skipped on down, but let's talk a little bit about your language literacy network.
I am happy to. So Goff and Tunmer with the simple view of reading, it was based on a lot of research. I think they developed the simple view of reading around the late 80s, early 90s. And the Reading Rope, even though everyone quotes 2001, that was the first date it was published with a copyright. It was actually hand-drawn in that same exact form by Dr. Hollis Scarborough in 1992.
Is that black and white one that I see sometimes? Okay, because I see the color one more often now, but okay.
Yeah, the black and white, hand-drawn, and so she drew that in 1992 based on the same body of research that Goff and Tunmer put forth the simple view of reading, right? So we're going back 30 years now. And when I started working on the Language Literacy Network, it started through a conversation with a group of colleagues called the Peaceniks. And we kept talking about how everyone's talking about reading, no one's talking about writing. We need a writing rope instead of a reading rope. And I said, well, no, we have a writing rope, Joan Sedita. Right. I know she was the guest. Yeah. I said, what we really need is we need a writing rope, right? Because we know from the current research, here we are 30 some years later, we know from the current research how integrated reading and writing are and the bidirectional relationship. So that was kind of what gave me the spark to create what eventually became the Language Literacy Network. And when you look at it, someone calls it a neuro-linguistic schematic. It's an illustration that is representing, based on our research understanding, the various language processes, skills that are part of reading and writing at the foundational skills level, as well as that higher order comprehension expression of spoken language level. And it's representing them. I know we could put this in your show notes, but the concept here is that these are neurons or centers of the brain that are processing specific skills or information, and they're all integrated and talking with one another. So it's very functionally connected. This is the term from neuroscience research. We have functional connectivity within the higher order skills, the foundational skills between reading and writing. All of this is a very integrated circuit. And so that's what this is representing, is the integrated circuit of the brain in the language literacy network. So when I was working on it, I wanted to bring it up to date. So again, the reading rope is from 1992. Well, much of that research has withstood the test of time 30 years later. So you'll see a lot of similarities because same research, same understanding. But there are a lot of really key differences because it's 30 years later and we have so much more research. I mean, one of the obvious differences is we have writing instead of just reading. We also have, this is a really big one. If you look at the foundational skills on the reading rope, sight word recognition has kind of its own entry there. But we now know that sight word recognition is a byproduct of decoding and encoding, but the phoneme graphing mapping. And through that becomes sight recognition. So in the language literacy network, sight recognition is shown not as a skill area that needs to be addressed, but rather as the byproduct of doing good encoding, decoding instructions. That's one big one. Also on the reading rope, it doesn't represent morphology. We now have so much research that supports how important morphology is for reading words, spelling words, and the integration of phonology, orthography, morphology, or what's called POM, phonology, orthography, morphology, meaning. Triple word form, Virginia Berninger has published a lot on the importance of integrating sounds, letters, meanings, or phonology, orthography, morphology, and meaning. And so that's represented there in of course, the spelling piece is represented there because writing is represented. Pragmatics is missing from the reading rope. But this is huge. And I'm not talking just about the spectrum population. I'm talking about developmental language disordered children who don't necessarily understand perspective or internal states of feelings or purpose. What is the purpose of this? So our main idea, all of those start to fall into pragmatic skills. So pragmatics got added. I think that probably covers the main differences, but bottom line is it represents the current body of research, whereas the reading rope represents 30 years ago.
If I wanted to use this with my trainees, do I have your permission to use your language literacy network?
100%. So we make it freely available, and any one of your listeners can go on our website and download it. We do ask you to sign off just saying that you're not going to use it for commercial purposes. But yeah, in fact, a lot of university faculty have adopted it into their curriculum at the pre-service level. So it's now part of language literacy courses.
Perfect.
Reading courses. So a lot more professionals or professionals to be are being exposed to it. I'm really excited to say that in 2024, it was adopted by the state of Illinois Board of Ed.
Wow.
And it is part of their comprehensive literacy program. You'll find the Language Literacy Network on page 30, and they really recognize it and the role of spelling and writing especially. So yeah, but please, we're trying, just like the reading rope is kind of out there. I mean, most teachers have at least seen it, whether they have a deep understanding, that's another issue or question, but most teachers have seen it. But again, it's 30 years old. We have to get the Language Literacy Network out there, and that's why we're making it freely available.
I love the change. I love the transition. I love all the additional pieces that have now been added to it because it does flesh it out even further than, I thought the reading rope was great, but then I saw yours and I was like, well, holy cow. That's just so much more.
There's a lot more to it, right? Yeah. And, and maybe the reading rope in pre-service teaching programs, that might be a good place to start.
Right.
In fact, I know of professors who will have actually 3 now. They'll have the reading rope. And okay, well, this is the big picture. Then they fill it in with the Language Literacy Network.
Oh.
And then active view of reading. That's what it's called. Cartwright and Duke. And if you compare side by side the active view of reading and the Language Literacy Network, the language pieces are all there. What they have separately in their model is executive function, self-monitoring, mostly executive function kinds of skills, attention. And yes, that's hugely part of it. But when I created the Language Literacy Network, I just wanted to focus on the language, because you can have your EF skills and still not have reading and writing if you don't have language. You have to have the language, because at its core, reading and writing is language.
Absolutely.
But anyhow, yeah, so some professors are presenting all three.
I think, like you said, introduce them maybe with Scarborough, and then as they progress, like my trainees have to go for 2 years with me, and as they get to those upper level coursework with me, start to present the complexity that's involved.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything. When we first kind of learn the basics, right? And then we start to fill it in. Yeah, I think that's great.
Wonderful.
As you guys were discussing, I think that I've noticed informal observations through the therapist side, working with the kids. I've actually kind of noticed a decrease in pragmatics with students. I almost attribute it to like around COVID time. I kind of see a decline in that area. I don't know if you've seen something like that, or if you can give us a reason why maybe we're seeing more of that.
Yeah, well, we could always point to social media as well, but I'll leave that. I do think that's a part of it for sure. But there's actually been several studies looking at this out of the speech language pathology world, because it comes down to, spoken language skills, essentially. First of all, the number of referrals that we've seen for children with speech language delays skyrocketed, like hundreds of percent after COVID. And they do attribute it to children not being in more social environments, whether it was daycare, preschool, or regular school. And, so that's actually the main one. Then, of course, there's the whole device piece as well. But there's been a huge increase in the number of children with speech language delays. And as we know, oral language is the anchor upon which literacy builds. And if you don't have that foundation, it's just even harder. But yeah, pragmatic skills, social skills, and not even, we're not talking on the spectrum, we're simply talking just having basic understanding of pragmatics. And these are things, as a speech language pathologist, we have seen students like this over the years. Now we're just seeing more of them.
And I think too, sometimes, and I'm not trying to point fingers by any stretch, but I think with social media being so prevalent, I think sometimes the devices take the place of the conversations that would typically have happened with parent and child, or like you said, daycare worker and child, that sometimes that has kind of led to some of this as well. That's just my informal. I'm not a doctor or anything, obviously, but that's just my informal observation.
100%. I mean, I get kind of angry when I'm outside and I see a young mother pushing her stroller, and she's just on her phone, not talking. I mean, that's language develops when you just talk to your child about whatever they see in their environment, whatever they're doing. You can never talk too much to your child. That's how language develops. And it's not happening as much. I think that's what you were referring to in part.
Same thing when you go out to eat and you see the whole family, two kids on their iPads and the parents are on their phones. And I'm like, I'd give my right arm to have all of my kids sitting in front of me at the dinner table with their devices gone. That would be great. I mean, they're adults, so I'd give my right arm for them to come eat supper with me.
Truth, right?
I think this is a good place to talk about what the changes you've seen. You've been in the education area for a while. What are some of the changes, like we've talked about just now with devices? What are some of the other changes that you've seen come about? Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe it's just a change.
Yeah, well, one of the big ones, of course, was the whole mandating of phonological awareness instruction. That was a huge one. Although I have to say, sadly, here we are, that was mandated in 1998. There are still many, many classroom teachers and other interventionists who don't have phonemic awareness skills themselves and or not able to teach phonemic awareness skills. So yeah, we've come a long way, but in some ways we haven't. So
there's still a long way to go.
Then, of course, yes. And we talked about the whole social media, not so much social media devices and COVID, but I think one other big change is the one I think we're all aware of, which is kind of the fall of Lucy Calkins.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. and the rise of science of reading. And I want to talk about science of reading, but that was huge. And we have to credit in good part Emily Hanford,
Yes.
who recorded the documentary series for American Public Media Radio. Great investigative journalism, great reporting. And she, not single-handedly, but she was a huge, huge part of this change. And so, yes, the fall of Lucy Calkins, the whole language in general being looked at again. So now we have science of reading, and we have SOR, capital SOR, like the SOR movement, science of reading. And then we have what I'll call lowercase science of reading. We've always had science of reading, meaning research being done, usually in academic places, but research that tells us best practices, that teases it all out. We've had this research for decades and decades. It was what led to the mandating of phonological awareness instruction in the 90s. It's out there. So I think there's some misunderstanding of SOR, and now I'm talking capital letters, science of reading, as and it is kind of a movement. It's kind of coming into the vacuum, the space that's been left behind by the fall of Calkins. And there's a lot of good with it. There's a lot of good, but there are a lot of pieces missing as well. And I think rather than get on the capital SOR bandwagon, we need to just get on the lowercase science of reading, and I'll say writing, because I'm a huge fan of writing, and just be aware of research and stay informed as best as we can. And sure, it's a lot, and I can't keep up with all of it. And part of my job with Spell Talk is reviewing research abstracts and research articles. So, it's hard to keep up with everything. Also, with the SOR, the movement, there is a bit of misunderstanding. I know some people incorrectly think that SOR is just about phonics, and it's not. However, some leaders in that capital SOR are more focused on reading, and in the past have been more focused on more the foundational skills. Not that they don't recognize the value of the other skills, but that's just been a focus, and that's shifting. So I think, I can understand why there's been some misunderstanding or misperception of what SOR is, but it isn't. And if you go lowercase, let's just go lowercase. The research that drives our understanding of how best to teach reading and writing, it's about all the language components, right? It's about everything in that language literacy network. And when I created the language literacy network, just like when Dr. Scarborough created the reading rope, it was based on the research. It wasn't just, some idea we had after having a couple of glasses of wine. So the research is there to support those pieces. So look at the research and don't just jump on a bandwagon.
No, I agree with that. And I know what you're talking about with the capital SOR because, of course, we have the National Panel Report from 2000 or something like that. It talked about the big five and it talked about comprehension. And I think, like we talked about earlier, the low-hanging fruit are the first three. And then, of course, morphology, vocabulary, and then they get to comprehension. But there's more to comprehension than instructing in the first four. Right. And I think that's where I love Language Literacy Network. That's where, because it's more comprehensive and it brings in all the other parts that's needed. But I know exactly what you're talking about, because my concern with talking about the science of reading is that people are just going to think it's these lower end skills and ignore all the incidentals that go. Yeah, thank you. With comprehension and writing and spelling and all that. I can see there's so much good, but because people don't fully understand it, the pendulum may swing back the other way again. Because they're saying, well, look at this. And you've seen this report, I'm sure, talking about how our students haven't scored. Was it a fourth graders?
Oh, the NAP report,
yeah. How, look, we've been doing science of reading, and look how far they've plummeted. Well, okay, take that with a grain of salt, but we need to incorporate all of it. It can't just be those first few pillars.
Right. Yeah, no, that's just it. It's not one or the other, and we can't be swinging the pendulum every 10 years or 20 years or whatever it is. It is all the pieces of the Language Literacy Network, and they're all equally important. Yes, at certain parts, points in time, and grade levels. You're putting a little more focus in certain areas, but you're not ignoring the others, and they all need to come together. And yeah, that's where I do think that there's a little bit of a shortcoming in the capital SOR. We need to understand that, take comprehension, but of course we know comprehension and expression, it's all important. Comprehension strategies are good. There's nothing wrong with teaching strategies, but if you don't have the language skills, if you don't have syntax, if you don't have prosodic competence, if you don't have morphological knowledge, you can't have strategies, right? Because you don't have the skill. A strategy is how to take your skill and apply it. But if you don't have that skill, how do you apply it?
Right.
So, okay, we'll get off our soapbox.
This concludes part 1 of our discussion with Jan Wasowicz. Join us next week as we continue our conversation. The Dyslexia Duo podcast hosts are Amy Rodenroth,
Melissa Dean.
Our producer is Greg Rodenroth.
You can find us on Facebook at The Dyslexia Duo.
Email us any questions or comments at thedyslexiaduo@gmail.com.
Awareness is so important. Share this podcast with your friends,
family,
and teachers.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.